The Sri Lankan government is intent on destroying the Tamil Tigers once and for all. The military offensive in the northeast of the island has reduced the Tamil militants to a tiny sliver of territory. But at what cost? My guest today is Sri Lanka's Minister for Disaster Management and Human Rights, Mahinda Samarasinghe. Has respect for international law and basic human rights become collateral damage in Colombo's war? Mahinda Samarasinghe in Geneva, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you, Stephen. Nice to be here.
Given your government's intention to destroy the Tamil Tigers, is it safe to assume that the offensive continues unabated?
Well, Stephen, I must tell you very categorically that this humanitarian operation that we have launched is to liberate the civilians from the clutches of extreme terrorism. The fight is to eradicate terrorism and to liberate the civilians and give them a future within a democratic framework.
Yeah, but I did ask you a specific question. Does the offensive continue unabated? I ask it because the UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs just said to the UN Security Council, quote, "I urge the government of Sri Lanka to hold back from any final military battle in order to allow the civilian population to get out safely one way or another."
Well, our priority is also to get the civilians out, but the LTT, as you know, is holding them forcibly, and it is now up to the international community to come out very strong and use whatever pressure that they have to get the LTT to release the civilians. Now, as I mentioned earlier, our fight is against terrorism, and as long as terrorism is there, we will continue to eradicate terrorism. But the objective, of course, is finally to liberate the civilian population from terrorism and address their genuine grievances.
The offensive goes on, and you talk about the international community. Well, of course, they have wade into the arena because they've asked both sides to respect a ceasefire. Are you prepared to do that?
Well, for example, the EU, in its statement which was released last week, the EU Council of Ministers not only called for a ceasefire, but they also asked the LTT to lay down their weapons. Now, if the LTT lays down their weapons tomorrow, there will not be any reason for us to fight. There will be automatic ceasefire. As long as the LTT is using weapons, as long as the LTT is not allowing these civilians to leave, their freedom of movement being restricted, the civilians being shot and killed in cold blood, and massive human rights violations being committed against the civilian population, our job is to ensure that this kind of terrorism is wiped out once and for all.
And is it justifiable, do you think, to continue to use heavy weapons in those areas where you know many tens of thousands of civilians are trying to seek shelter?
Well, I'm with you on that. There's absolutely no justification to use heavy weapons. And in fact, about 10 days ago, the armed forces took a conscious decision not to use any heavy weapons. We have not been using heavy weapons. We are fighting man to man, we are fighting door to door, we are fighting street to street. And this is the way that we are going to ensure that terrorism is wiped out, because, as you know, the LTT is now restricted to a very small area of about 40 square kilometers.
But, Minister, just a couple of days ago in the international, sorry to interrupt, but just a couple of days ago in the International Herald Tribune, there was a graphic account, including direct quotes from a doctor working in a makeshift hospital in the so-called safe zone or no-fire zone, describing how 10 people at least had lost their lives in an artillery attack, and he said that it had appeared to come from the area where government forces are deployed.
Well, Stephen, we categorically deny this. In fact, this particular doctor has gone on record as saying that he never spoke to anyone, that he is not in a position to speak to anyone. We know that there have been previous attempts to use this doctor's name. In fact, this is the Regional Director of Health Services in charge of Mullaitivu, and he has been used on several other occasions, and he has himself spoken to the Secretary Health and very clearly stated that he never spoke to any media. So this is once again a part of the propaganda that the LTT is using to distort what is really happening there. I state again very categorically.
Sure. Are you trying to suggest
to me any heavy weapons, Stephen?
Well, are you trying to suggest to me that in the course of the last, 6 weeks or so of very bitter fighting, that your forces haven't been responsible for civilian casualties on sometimes a very serious scale?
Well, we have never targeted civilians, and we will never target civilians, because as I mentioned earlier, our fight is to liberate the civilians from terrorism. Now, we also know that the LTT, previous to the no-fire zone, which is now established in the coastal area, previous to that, they had this, their gun position station. In the previous no-fire zone, they were firing at the armed forces. The armed forces knew the coordinates of this heavy weaponry. They even knew what kind of weaponry the LTT were using, and there were precise targeted firing on the part of the armed forces. We consciously avoided civilian areas because, as I said earlier, what is the objective as far as the government is concerned in targeting civilians who are our people? These are Sri Lankans whom we are trying to liberate from the clutches of terrorism.
I'm just looking, if I may, I'm just looking at the words of the International Committee for the Red Cross's South Asia chief, Jacques de Mayo, who says, and I'm quoting his words directly, much of the fighting has been, quote, intrinsically incompatible with respect for the basic rules of war. Now, you are the Minister, apart from anything else, for human rights in your government. Are you trying to tell me that your government doesn't acknowledge that it has made any mistakes or in any way has failed to respect human rights in this conflict?
Well, I can categorically tell you, Stephen, that consciously we have never done that, because we know that there are some of these hospitals and other areas where civilians are there. The coordinates have been made available to us, and there's no necessity for us whatsoever in targeting those areas. We have avoided those areas, and I must tell you,
the New York Times has seen a memo in which a UN official in Sri Lanka sent a message to New York saying our team on the ground was certain that a particular artillery shell that caused a great deal of damage, killing 9 civilians, came from the Sri Lankan military, apparently in response to an LTTE, that is a Tamil Tiger shell.
In fact, I have also seen that memo. We discussed this memo with the UN resident coordinator. He agreed that this memo, in the first place, was a confidential memo, and secondly, he admitted
just
finally
because it's confidential
after the
doesn't mean that the information within it isn't very important.
No, that's exactly what I'm leading up to, Stephen, that he admitted that this memo was not correct. In fact, the memo was never used. After that, I have in my phone right now a message that the UN resident coordinator has sent me, resident coordinator in Colombo, saying that the firing, in fact, in their opinion, came from LTT position. So this is the contradiction that I presented to him, and he agreed that this memo will not be used, and it has not been used. So there is this kind of thing also which is being picked up by journalists, and it is put in newspapers. And I can tell you very frankly that neither the ICRC nor the UN at any point have ever said that the government has fired into civilian positions. Of course, they have said that civilians have died, but to that we have asked them the question, how do you identify a civilian from a terrorist?
Nobody, and at least of all you, I think, even in the course of this interview, nobody would dispute that the civilians in this remaining sliver of territory that is under Tamil Tiger control are suffering terribly. And clearly many of them want to get out. Many people involved in this have said the Tamil Tigers is trying to prevent them getting out, but nonetheless substantial numbers of people are getting out. Why is it that when they get out you will not allow international observers to see what happens when they are screened, first received by the Sri Lankan military?
Well, that is not correct, Stephen. In fact, when they come from the front defense lines, they are received by the army. They are received not with guns. They are received with bottles of water. They are received with food. Then they are transported immediately to what is called the Omante entry-exit point, which is very close to the forward defense lines. And there we have allowed the UNHCR and ICRC to be present so that the registration process is observed, and then within 24 hours